very roughly how Bitcoin works and what are transactions, how money is created in Bitcoin, and how the transactions are broadcast and people make blocks, the participants make blocks, and one of the block has to eventually survive as the next block. The other blocks will become useless, and if a transaction does not make it into the block, then that transaction will eventually be picked up by another node to become the next block. And that's how the process works. We also talked about some basic ideas from cryptography, mostly because blockchain is very much dependent on cryptography, especially hash functions for creating hash pointers, digital signatures for giving authenticity to the transactions, and also public key for identity, and public-private key for signature verification, this kind of concepts. Now, I assume that you will learn more about this throughout the course. What I want to do now is to, first of all, I want to mention to you that Bitcoin is a very primitive blockchain. It is called a blockchain 1.0. So, so what is blockchain 1.0? It means that in Bitcoin, what happens is that if you want to automate some transaction, right? So let's say there are multiple different types of transactions. Let's say you want to pay money, let's say 10 Bitcoin to somebody, and you have multiple different people whose money will be put together to make that 10 coins. So in that case, you will need multiple people to sign the transaction. So there is a method for doing multiple signatures or multi-sig transaction. Similarly, money can be given to a group of people. So that 2 out of 3 or 4 out of 6 of the recipients has to sign to use that money, right? So it may be to a group that you are giving the money, and there also you use multiple signatures or multi-sig transaction. There is also something called an escrow transaction. An escrow transaction is when you have a recipient who is going to ship. Let's say let's say Amazon takes Bitcoin to ship what you want to buy. So let's say you want to buy a cell phone and it costs say some 0.3 Bitcoin. I don't know, whatever the number is. But until you receive the package and check that the package has really a phone, you don't want to make the transaction to be complete. So you can use what is called an escrow transaction, in which a third party will also have to sign that a third party which is trusted by you and Amazon. So you send the money, but you say that it requires signature of the third party in order for Amazon to get that full custody of the money. And there is something called an escrow transaction, where this escrow guy has to also sign. And then there is also something called a micro transactions, which is useful when you are making phone calls, let's say, and you are paying in Bitcoin for the phone call. Then every minute you might want to pay some amount, and then if you speak for 90 minutes, you pay certain amount. If you speak 70 minutes, then you will pay less. So there is a process for this. So all these types of transactions require some amount of automation. And so there is a language in Bitcoin called the Bitcoin scripting language, which is used for creating a script. So through which this automated scripting happens. Now this language is kind of looks like assembly language, and this language is very, very limited. It cannot do very, other than these 3-4 types of different things, it cannot do a whole lot of things. So therefore, in around 2014, I believe, this butyric Vitalik Buterin, this guy, he came up with this new types of blockchain modeled after Bitcoin, and that is Ethereum. And I believe that you will learn about Ethereum in the next, after the lunch. But Ethereum has decided that I will not only have the money and the transactions in this blockchain, but I will have a very powerful programming language that will actually allow me to actually script very complex transactions so that everything can happen automatically. And these scripts that you write are called smart contracts. So the smart contracts are the major is the major contribution of Ethereum to the blockchain technology. So now afterwards, all blockchains have smart contracts. So smart contracts allow you to actually write a very complex or simple, whatever you want, set of automation of transactions. And also smart contracts allow you to actually, and this smart contract is now replicated also with the blockchain. So the smart contracts are executed in every node because you actually want to make sure that the activities that happens because of the smart contract happens at every replica of the blockchain. So that's the blockchain 2.0. And then, but both the Bitcoin and Ethereum, they are what we call the public blockchain. They are permissionless blockchain, which means that, as I said earlier, that I can create a public key, and then I can say that a hash of this public key is what I am, who I am, right? And there is no way to know who is behind it, and therefore I can do various wrong things and still become part of the blockchain, and finding who I am really is the problem. Now, people started thinking that a lot of the things that blockchain technology provides, other than currency, other than cryptocurrency, are very useful, and therefore I need to have a way of creating blockchain where all the users are responsible users, they are known people. And there they started creating this permission blockchains where every person or every node that is part of the blockchain has a known identity. And usually this known identity is done using digital certificates. And that's how the Hyperledger, that also you will learn, I believe, from IBM, Hyperledger blockchain came into being, and that's blockchain 3.2. And blockchain 4.0 is also currently being used. It has various other features other than permission. It has features such as it supports stablecoin and other things. So the blockchain technology is evolving, and as it is evolving, it is finding more and more applications. Now, what I want to talk about right now is the concept of centralization versus decentralization, and how the consensus process comes in. I already told you about consensus process in some rough terms, so we'll see that in a more detailed way. So far, in most of the times, like you are using Facebook or you are using your bank account on the internet, all these things are centralized systems. Centralized in the sense that there is a central data repository, and all transactions go through this central authority, and they decide when what you are doing is valid or not, whether what you are doing has to be recorded permanently or rejected. All these decisions are made centrally. Now, so this is more like what we used to call client and client. Sandeep, you got muted. Okay. So the centralized system has this advantage that everything is managed by a single entity. So therefore, it is very easy to decide who to permit to be part of the system, whether somebody has to be banned, whether what you are doing is allowed or not, and whether what you are doing should be recorded permanently or deleted, etc. Now, only problem with centralization is that you have to trust that central authority in order for you to, in order for you to actually trust the entire system. So if you don't trust your bank to manage your money properly, then you don't go to the bank to keep your money, right? So similarly, if you don't trust Facebook, we trust Facebook, although we should not, quite a bit. And we put our photos and everything, and we assume that they are not going to misuse it, right? But in reality, that is not always the case, and therefore there is a move towards decentralization. So you might have also heard of Web 3.0, that is the decentralized web. Web 2.0 was when social media and everything came about. Web 3.0 is the decentralized web. So decentralization has the trust advantage because you are kind of trusting the collective wisdom of a lot of people. In case of public blockchain, you are like Bitcoin or Ethereum, you are trusting the majority. You are assuming that the majority is honest and majority is not going to misuse things. But there may be some actors who are trying to misuse, but majority will not, right? So precisely 51% has to be honest for Bitcoin or blockchain, Bitcoin or Ethereum to work. Whereas in case of decentralization, if it is a permission blockchain, which is not a public blockchain, private blockchain, or it may be public, but it is only nodes that can create transactions or only nodes that can do consensus are permission, then you know their exact identity. So you assume that majority of these people will not be dishonest. And that's the process by which you have to work. Now, if majority suddenly decide to become dishonest, then none of these things will work, right? So decentralization is harder to manage. It's harder to distribute work because there is no central agency which is saying that you do this, you do this, you do this. You have to basically have an algorithmic way of distributing work. It is difficult to ban a bad person or bad node, and it is difficult to provision in decentralization. But there are solutions to this. So centralization is an easy way to implement a service like a banking service or a social media service, but it is have a trust issue. Decentralization reduces the trust issue, but it is much harder to manage, and that's where the blockchain 2.0, 3.0, etc. are coming up, which makes it easier and easier to manage this. So that's the difference between centralization and decentralization. Now, decentralization may be also mixed with partial centralization. For example, email, the SMTP protocol is actually a completely decentralized protocol for mail, right? So it's basically a peer-to-peer protocol. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, we have used Hotmail and Gmail and various other mails, which actually control the majority of the emails, and therefore it has kind of become centralized, not fully centralized, but it is centralized. Google and Microsoft, these guys are dominating, and they have control over your emails. They can read your emails. They can collect information about your behavior or your preferences through this. But originally, the SMTP protocol was decentralized. But decentralization means that every entity, like every school, every company, every college, should have SMTP server. They should have SMTP clients, and that many organizations do not afford. Therefore, they use Gmail and Microsoft Mail, etc. And therefore, it has kind of become centralized. Now, although in this course we will not talk about this, but our research shows that the same happened with Bitcoin and Ethereum, that make 90% of the Bitcoin and 90% of the Ethers are controlled by less than 1% of the nodes. That means 99% of the nodes in Bitcoin and Ethereum almost have no Bitcoin and no money, either zero or very close to zero amount of Bitcoin. So they also have acquired this characteristic. So even though your design was to fully decentralize, unfortunately, because of the money involved, and the money is actually purchasable with dollars or with rupees, so it has become very, very centralized, and only very rich people have real control over Bitcoin or Ethereum. In blockchain, the decentralization has multiple aspects. So first of all, the ledger or the chain is maintained by all the entities that are willing to maintain it, mostly the full nodes. Who has the authority over over which transactions are valid? This is also decided by anybody who is reading transactions, because all transactions are broadcast. Except that now what is happening is, during the block picking, if your transaction fee is not to my liking, I may never take your transaction. So now Bitcoin has a new algorithm by which the decision whether to include a transaction in a block is based on the age of the transaction. That is how long it has been waiting to be collected in a block, and the transaction fee. But it is, as I said, in 2014, there will be no more mining rewards, and then the transaction fees will become so important that it will be very difficult to put a transaction into the permanent blockchain without giving good amount of fees. Who creates the Bitcoins, for example? This is currently kind of decentralized. It is kind of decentralized in the following sense that anybody can make a block, and if it's blocked, to make the block, he has to solve the hash puzzle, and the hash puzzle solving has become so difficult that you need to invest a lot of money to buy computing power, hardware and electricity, etc., in order to actually win the hash puzzle. Therefore, it has also become very not fully centralized, but a few entities in the world actually can create a new block, which was not the original intent of the Bitcoin, but it has become like that. And once you win your block, you can get the reward, and that's how the Bitcoin's money is created. Earlier, in the old days, it could be created by anybody because the computing power was not required to be that high, but now it has become so high that it is only a few who can do it. Now, there is also the issue of rules of the Bitcoin, right? So, or Ethereum, right? What are the rules? Like, for example, what is the size of the block? Right now, the size of the block is 2 megabytes, but people demanded at some point that 2 megabyte is too small, and more transactions can be fitted if you make block size 4 megabyte. Now, that is a change of the rule of the system, and that has not happened yet. That was proposed and many times argued, etc. Similarly, there may be other rules. For example, Bitcoin is about to add a smart contracts. So then the rules of the system would change, and that will lead to what we call the forking of the Bitcoin. So Bitcoin already has been forked a few times, Ethereum has been forked a few times, but these changes will lead to forking. And at the very end of this lecture, I'll talk about forking. And how do Bitcoins acquire exchange value? This exchange value is actually totally outside the technology, and it is based on how people are trusting. So as I said that in early days of Bitcoin, in 2010, somebody was paying 10,000 Bitcoins to buy a pizza. Now 10,000 Bitcoins will make you one of the richest person in the world, right? So this exchange value is totally based on speculation. And this speculation, and now people are manipulating, like Elon Musk writes a tweet and then the value of Bitcoin changes. So these are some of the issues that one has to worry about. There are certain other things that is also unrelated to the blockchain technologies, such as exchanges, where you actually give Bitcoin and get real money, like fiat money, like dollar. Wallet software, that is where you keep your Bitcoins, and then service providers. These are nodes that do various kind of things, including very bad things such as mixers. We'll not talk about them right now. So in Bitcoin, the decentralization by design. There is a peer-to-peer network, so it's on top of TCP/IP. You actually have a peer-to-peer networking. So any two Bitcoin nodes can communicate with each other over this network. That's how they do broadcasting using something called a gossip protocol. Mining is also a part of the decentralization or the consensus process. Now updating the software. So Bitcoin software has to be updated from time to time for various fixes. Now that is done by a core developer community. And there often there is a fight. And this fight leads to split of Bitcoin, which has happened at least 3 times already. So now let's focus on consensus, because these are what I mentioned. All these different aspects of decentralization are actually quite elaborate, and it will not be fitted in the span of time we have. So let's talk about consensus. You already have some basic idea of consensus, so let's look at it. So the key consensus is the key technical challenge, and distributed consensus has been a challenge since 1970s. So actually, what happened is that in 1970s, when networking started becoming mainstream, a lot of computers were networked. People started thinking in terms of distributed databases, distributed computing. And that time itself, the consensus problem arose. The consensus problem arose because there are many situations in which all the distributed computers, the computers which are independently acting, but they can communicate with each other using network, they have to often select a leader. And to select the leader, they have to all agree that IP address or MAC address so and so is the leader of this network. And that's a consensus problem. Everybody has to agree. The consensus means everybody agrees to a single point. So consensus problem has been there since then, and it has been shown theoretically the impossibility of consensus when some of the machines can crash. So this is a very famous theorem by Nancy Lynch and others, that in a crash, if any of the computers can crash at any time, then arriving consensus is impossible. So people started thinking, if I cannot do consensus, how can I do distributed system? I cannot select a leader. I cannot decide on a single decision together among all these computers. So then people started talking about relaxing the assumptions about these things. For example, in the result of Nancy Lynch, it was assumed that the nodes are indistinguishable from each other. So now they are saying that, okay, let's give the nodes numbers or some identity which is fixed. It cannot be changed. And then if I try to do consensus, it's still impossible, but probabilistic consensus is possible. And that led to this famous work by the Turing awardee researcher that you can actually have consensus, probabilistic consensus, even if nodes crash or some nodes try to act maliciously. Some nodes try to confuse you, but other nodes, if 2/3 of the nodes are acting in good faith, then I can reach consensus with almost with probability 1. So that's what the Byzantine fault tolerant consensus methods are. So this technology of consensus has been very, very big area of research for late 70s to 80s to 90s. However, even if there are algorithms to reach consensus probabilistically, they are very, very expensive. They take a long time. They take many, many data information exchange between all the nodes and so on. So until recently, people used to think that consensus is possible, but it is very hard to actually do consensus because it will take a long time to converge, and sometimes it may not converge. So given that situation, Satoshi Nakamoto decided that, well, let's do something different. In the original concept of consensus, we never talked about giving money to the people who actually can help us do consensus. Since we have cryptocurrency, we'll give you money, and therefore I may be able to solve the problem by rewarding people. Now, how does rewarding people help? We'll come to that. Rewarding people does not necessarily solve all problems, but in this case, there is a little more complication than just rewarding, and we'll talk about that. So, distributed consensus is a protocol that terminates, that is, it should not be like going into a cycle all the time, and it should, when it starts and it finishes in due time, and all nodes that are behaving honestly should decide on the same value. So in a Bitcoin, for example, when multiple blocks are created by, remember I said that multiple nodes may actually create blocks, and then one of them will be actually added to the chain. So which block will be added to the chain is the question of, is the same value, is the value that I want to decide on. And that is why the consensus problem arises in Bitcoin. That is, every time the nodes decide to create new blocks, they create blocks which differ from each other. So one of the blocks has to be chosen to be the next block, but there is no central authority who says that your block will be chosen. So it has to be decided by a protocol, and that protocol is the consensus protocol. So now let's see what the Bitcoin blockchain, how the Bitcoin blockchain grows. So at any point in time, the Bitcoin has already a block of sequence of blocks, and each block is a block of transactions, right? And until then, assume, so it's kind of like a, those of you who are familiar with proof by induction. So this is an inductive process. Let's assume until this time, the blocks were somehow chosen, and you have a sequence of blocks, which are deterministic. That is, everybody has the same set of blocks and in the same sequence. At this point, every node will want to know what would be the next block, or want to decide what would be the next block. So each node has heard, because all transactions are broadcast. So each node has a set of transactions it has heard, but which is not yet part of any block. So this is the situation. So you have a lot of transactions. Now let's say I have 3 nodes here. So this node has these transactions, this node has these transactions, and this node has these transactions. And they have to decide that I made this block, and this guy made this block, and this guy made this block. They have to decide which block will be the next block in the blockchain, right? Now, there are many issues. Nodes may crash, and some of the nodes may try to, be malicious and confuse the protocol. Also, nodes, networks are imperfect. So not all pairs of nodes are connected. Sometimes there is failure, link failure. There may be faults in the network, and there is latency, and there is no notion of a global time because the clock on each computer is different, right? So there will be some microsecond, millisecond, nanosecond difference between all clocks. So there is no way to say that whoever made first block will be chosen, because when I make a block, I put a timestamp. But my timestamp and your timestamp are not comparable because clocks are not synchronized. So that leads us to the Byzantine general problem. The Byzantine general's problem is basically a problem in which you have multiple different nodes which need to come with come up with the same value, but assume that some of the nodes may behave maliciously and some of the nodes may actually crash. So Fisher, Lynch, and Patterson, I was talking about this, Nancy Lynch and Michael Fisher and Patterson, they said that if the nodes are behaving deterministically, then consensus is impossible even with a single faulty node. Okay? So but there are well-known protocols in distributed systems. So many of you have heard of things like Kafka. So these guys also have consensus problem, and they usually solve it by a protocol called Paxos. So Paxos is actually assumes that what Nancy Lynch and all decided, that the nodes will be deterministic, there will be no random number drawing or anything. So there is no randomization. So Paxos does randomize, and it has the property that when Paxos finishes consensus, the result is correct. But Paxos has no guarantee that it will not get stuck in round and round and round and not reach a consensus. Now, that happens very rarely. So therefore, in real software, many times Paxos is used. So the question is then, Satoshi Nakamoto could have used Paxos to do his consensus. But he realized that using Paxos will be very expensive for each node. Secondly, that using Paxos can lead to a situation where no new block can be created because the protocol will get stuck. So he wanted a method by which it will always produce the next block, and the block will be eventually consistent throughout the network. So the earlier impossibility results by Lynch and all can be now not be worried about, because the model of computation they use was not necessarily what is happening in the real world. So let's not worry about them. So Bitcoin consensus works better in practice than in theory. The theory is still catching up because there is a lot of randomization that goes on, and because of the randomization, the theory is still, nobody has done a full-fledged analysis of the Bitcoin consensus algorithm, but it works. So, what Satoshi Nakamoto said is that let's change the model and say that anybody who actually reaches the consensus or creates a block which will be the node, which will be the block on which consensus is made, that guy will get some reward. And that reward initially was 50 bitcoins, later it was 25, and now it is 12.5, etc. So now what that means is that, so if I become a node that wins the consensus process several times, I will accumulate currency. And if I accumulate currency, let's say I win in the beginning, I win 3 times, I actually become a consensus maker. So I have now 150 bitcoins. Now Bitcoin has certain value in the market because of its rarity and its novelty, and people started making a lot of stories in the market that this is the future of money. There will be no more regular money, and all that story went about, and therefore people started saying that okay, so this is something we should collect, because later on in the future it will have a lot of value. So because of its value, the person who wins the consensus at least once will have some money. Therefore, that node will never, hopefully that node will never become a malicious node, because if it becomes malicious node and it destroys the sanctity of the blockchain protocol, then the value of Bitcoin will go down, and that will make that person, that node, lose money. And therefore, the Bitcoin consensus reward system works based on the individual's value of the Bitcoin he has accumulated. If the person says Bitcoin is useless, then he can become malicious. But because he is not, he has some what we call stake in the Bitcoin, therefore his money is actually something that is that he has put a lot of work in, and therefore he doesn't become malicious. And then the second thing that Bitcoin consensus does, as I explained before, is that initially when let's say 3 nodes win the hash puzzle, they solve the hash puzzle. All of their blocks are possible candidates to be the next block. So the nodes that are close to them will add their block as the next block. So now I will have 3 different types of blockchain in which 3 different last node is there. But over time, whoever is closer to me will see that and start building more nodes on it. And similarly, the ones who are closer to the other side will build nodes on top of it. Now, whichever makes 6 or more blocks first will be the winner. And therefore, this is what is called an eventual consistency. Eventually, over a period of 1 hour or a little more, all the copies of the blockchain will eventually become the same. And therefore, even though in one round of consensus, you never know that the winning block is actually the winning block. After 1 hour or so, you can say that this has actually made it into the blockchain, and therefore this is the winner. So this is how, and that's when you can actually start using your reward currency. Before that, you cannot use your rewarded currency, because you have to wait for at least an hour before the reward becomes more probabilistically more sanguine. So it's a probabilistic method by which this consensus is reached, and therefore it never gets stuck. It eventually reaches a consistent view of the blockchain from all nodes around the world. Now, the other issue here is that in Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto actually was very, very smart. Right? So not only he has done this idea of reward and eventual consistency, he also saw the possibility of something called a Sybil attack. So since the nodes do not have identity, so I can create as many nodes as I want, right? So then I will have a higher chance of winning the block. So if I have a lot of money I will create 20,000 nodes, and somebody who has only one node will not be able to compete with me, because my 20,000 nodes will try to move the next block and he is alone, right? And this is called a Sybil attack. Same identity, same person creating multiple identities. That's the Sybil attack. So now what I'll do is what Bitcoin does is that they said this has to be stopped, right? So what happens in Bitcoin is that you your probability of winning the puzzle or solving the puzzle is based only on one thing, that is your ability to quickly compute lots and lots of hashes, millions and millions of hashes. So let's say you are very rich and you create 20,000 nodes, then 20,000 nodes will try to simultaneously create will simultaneously try to solve the hash problem. But if they independently try to solve the hash problem, they will be going through the same guesses, guessing the unknown part. The same guesses, all 20,000 will try the same guesses. That's the waste of time. So it makes more sense for him to put together those 20,000 into a single node, and that single node will coordinate with each other. Will know that which hashes have already been tried. So he will use massive parallelism, but in a coordinated manner. Therefore, his chance of making a new block will increase much more than if he creates 20,000 independent identities. And that's how the Sybil attack is also not possible in Bitcoin, because your money is fixed. So how much hardware you can buy is fixed. So whether you split that hardware into multiple identities or single identity, it doesn't matter. So that's how Satoshi also created this Sybil attack proof consensus mechanism. So it's similar to like what we call a lottery or referral, right? So let's say you go to a party and everybody is given a ticket with a number in, right? And you have to pick. Then from the draw, you pick one number, and the person who holds that number will be winner. It will be very similar to that. So what Satoshi has done is that using a distributed consensus protocol, he has created exact similar method of selecting a random node for creating the next. But since there is no central authority to create these numbers and to actually distribute the numbers and then do a raffle, so this entire description of the consensus protocol I gave, that is, everybody collects a set of transactions, then they try to solve the hash puzzle. Whoever solves the hash puzzle first broadcasts the result and with the node, with the block, and then multiple of them actually finishes the hash puzzle around the same time. They all distribute. But if I already see a solution, then I won't distribute anymore, because I know that somebody else has solved it. So I'll stop trying. But if since there is network latency, multiple nodes may not know that around the same time others also solved it. So there will be multiple different ones that will be spread. But eventually, after multiple different other blocks are made, eventually it will become consistent. So that's what the Bitcoin consensus method is. So the consensus algorithm is that new transactions are broadcast to all nodes. Each node collects new transaction into a block. In each round, a random node gets to broadcast its block. Other nodes accept the block only if all transactions in it are valid. Nodes express their acceptance of the block by including its hash in the next block they create. So The transactions are broadcast to all nodes, so all nodes have lots of transactions put in a block. So each node collects the new transactions it has seen into a block. Then they do the hash puzzle. So this is the random node selection is actually not done by a central authority, but everybody tries to solve a puzzle, and whoever solves the puzzle is the selected node. Now other nodes will then hear about it, because then the after solving you broadcast your your block with the result of the hash puzzle in it. Other nodes will check very quickly that all the transactions are valid in it, and it has indeed solved the problem, and then they will accept it. And then they accept their acceptance. They express their acceptance by actually, adding the hash of this block into their next block. Whoever creates the next block will put the hash of this block. So this is the case, the simplified case, where there is no competition after solving the hash puzzle. If only one node solves the hash puzzle, then this is how it goes. But as I said that many times, this is not how it works. Multiple nodes may actually solve the hash puzzle, and they may contain conflicting transactions in there. For example, this guy says that A gives money to B, and here this one says A gives the same money to A prime. Now, if look, here is a fork that has happened because both the nodes who created these blocks have won the hash puzzle. Now it turns out that after some time, these more blocks are created on this one, but this one does not have more blocks created on it. So therefore, this path will win. So therefore, a transaction. So B will be the loser here because B will not get the money, because according to the blockchain, A prime got this money. So this is when the double spending attack may happen, but one of the double spending result will win, the other will lose. So therefore, the system will remain consistent. So double spend actually may lead to a problem to Amazon, for example, because let's say A prime is Amazon and B is somebody else. So A gives money to B in this path, and in this path A gives money to A prime, where A prime is Amazon. So Amazon, after this block is made, if Amazon ships the item, then Amazon may be loser, because after some time it will be clear that this transaction is no longer valid. So Amazon didn't get the money, some B got the money. So therefore Amazon better wait for 6 confirmations. So that's what we already talked about, that Amazon has to wait for 6 confirmations at the list before it ships the item, because otherwise it may lose the money. So this entire process of solving the hash puzzle has a name. It's called a proof of work. So this is what is called a proof of work based consensus, right? The proof of work consensus is what Bitcoin does and what currently Ethereum does, but Ethereum is now moving to what is called a proof of stake. So we'll talk about that later. So now in this slides, I have explained why incentive is required, because if we assume that the nodes will be honest by nature, then that is never going to work. So therefore, we give them like rewards, and as they accumulate rewards, they have less reason to be malicious. So that's the whole idea. So block reward is the first incentive. Now there is a finite supply of blockchain, as I said, that in 2040 it will reach the 21 million. Actually, earlier than 2040, So at that point, you cannot get rewards. So therefore, you have to give a transaction fees. So every transaction, let's say I'm giving Amazon 1 Bitcoin, and I have to say that whoever creates the block will also get 0.003 Bitcoin as transaction fee. So therefore, whoever makes the next block will collect all the transaction fees. So that's the right now it is purely voluntary, like it, but in the future it may be mandatory. Now, although it's voluntary, but if you don't give any transaction fee, no node may pick up your transaction for connecting, for putting it into a block, and therefore your transaction may never become permanent. So therefore, you have to start paying fees now. So I talked about this, how the random node is picked. It is done by whoever solved the hash puzzle is the picked random node, and then the question is if multiple nodes solve the hash puzzle, how to avoid giving reward to all of them, and then how to prevent Sybil attack by making sure that the probability of your winning the hash puzzle is proportional to your computation power. So I will skip these. So proof of work is very, very expensive, as I said. It requires a lot of power because you do so many hashes to actually solve the problem. So we are talking about here 90 million hashes, 100 million hashes for creating one block, and each hash is a computation. So therefore, every time you compute a hash, you spend power. So another thing that happens is that as time progresses, in the beginning, you could solve the hash puzzle using your laptop. So a lot of people in the 2010 or so could actually gain some Bitcoin reward by having just a laptop. But over time, they started throwing in more and more hardware. So they started creating specialized hardware to solve hash puzzles. So what that means is that others have to also catch it. Because if others don't do, then only one person who has spent money to buy specialized hardware will always win the hash puzzle and always make the block and always get the money. Therefore, everybody started computing, and therefore the time to compute so many hashes become very fast. So in order to recalibrate, so what happens is that as soon as the hash solving time becomes smaller than 10 minutes, the system adjusts itself to create the target. Remember, there is a target to do the hash puzzle. The target value such that your block plus your guess together when hashed will become less than the target value. So this target value gets lower and lower such that the average time to solve the hash puzzle always remains close to 10 minutes. Therefore, a block creation time in Bitcoin is about 10 minutes. So, and the probability that somebody creates the next block is a fraction of the total hash power the person controls. So, how much hardware you can afford will determine the probability that you will make the next hash. Now, here is the problem that if majority of the miners, and not by number, but by the weight of hash power, follow the protocol correctly, then attacks are not possible in Bitcoin. But what happened until recently, China has now banned Bitcoin mining. But until then, that was probably in September this year, until then, most companies that had huge hardware farms to mine Bitcoins actually were in China. And there was always a fear that the Chinese government might decide to consolidate all these mining companies, and then they will have more than 51% power. And when they have more than 51% power, they can completely change the Bitcoin's history and everything. But fortunately, that never happened. But that kind of risk is always there. So there is an assumption that 51% are honest. So, and the other thing is that even though it's very difficult to compute the hash puzzle, but to check, once you have solved it, anybody can check it very, very fast. So all they have to do is that they have to compute this hash and see whether it's below the target. The person who is solving the puzzle, for him, this part is the unknown. So he will try from 0, 0, 0, 0 all the way to 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and eventually one of them will match. But in case of verifying that he has really solved the problem, it is very, very fast. So that's the good. To mine, your block reward plus transaction fee must be greater than your investment in hardware and electricity costs. And that's why miners, they always try to pump up the cost of Bitcoin so that they can make some profit. So putting it all together, we saw that Bitcoin's, blockchain has this concept of identities that are based on cryptography. Your real identity does not have to be rebuilt unless you are doing third generation blockchains like Hyperledger, where your identities are known, your cryptographic identities are connected to your real world identities, which is not the case with Bitcoin or Ethereum. Transactions are important thing, and transactions in Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. are all about money. But you can also have transactions which have nothing to do with money, even in Bitcoin. There is a way to actually put some information into a transaction, into a block, without actually giving money to anybody. But there are better permission blockchains in which you can do that. So you normally don't do that in Bitcoin or Ethereum. The concept of peer-to-peer network, that is all the nodes that are connecting and talking to each other over a peer-to-peer protocol. That's the corresponding Bitcoin protocol or Ethereum protocol. There is the consensus process which decides what would be the next block. And we solve the consensus process in Bitcoin and Ethereum. We use hash puzzles, and therefore we call it mining because it is a lot of work, and it's called proof of work. Now, as you will learn about Hyperledger in the course, you will see that there the identities are known identities. They are based on digital certificates. There the transactions are not about money but about information. They also have P2P network. There the consensus is not based on proof of work, but consensus is based on the protocols which has no incentive. This is the old Byzantine fault-tolerant protocols. And hash puzzles are not necessary because we have identities, and therefore we can actually give responsible identities the responsibility for doing a Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus. And there is the less than 1/3 of the nodes are malicious. Even then, the consensus process will correctly come to a consensus. Now, now Bitcoin has 3 types of consensus. One is, of course, the consensus of its state. That is the consensus we talked about so far. This is the consensus process. There is also consensus that happens outside the technology. That is the value of the Bitcoin in the real market. That is how many dollars per Bitcoin. This consensus has nothing to do with our technology. It is done at the stock market. So we don't normally have to worry about this. State consensus is what we worry about. And there is also something called rules consensus. Remember, we talked about that sometimes the rules change. For example, you may decide tomorrow that, not you, but the community of Bitcoin may decide tomorrow that each block will become, 4 megabytes. Or it may decide that consensus method will now, from now on, will not be proof of work, but it will be something like proof of stake. So then the rules of blockchain has changed, and that leads to something called forking of the blockchain. So there are two types of forks: hard fork and soft fork. Okay, so here is the example of a hard fork. So when does hard fork happen? Let's say you want to change the size of the block. You say that the block will be 4 megabytes. Now what will happen if you say block will be 4 megabytes? So every node has to change its client software, its wallet software, or whatever, its mining software, because now the rule has changed, right? So in this picture, let's say these are all nodes participating in Bitcoin. The green nodes are the ones who actually change according to the new rule. And then the white ones are lazy or for some reason don't want to change their software. Okay? So now what will happen? Suppose a new block is mined. The new block is 4 megabytes. Now that block will be broadcast to everybody. Now what will happen? By seeing this block, since this guy has a new software, he will say, oh, that's a new block and it is according to the new rules, so I am fine with it. The old block, the ones that did not change their software, will say, this is crazy, this is oversized, I'm going to reject this block. Same will happen with this guy. This guy has not changed its software, so it will not recognize a 4 megabyte block. So old nodes will never catch up. So they will throw away a lot of blocks. So their copy of the blockchain will start changing. So their copy of the blockchain will no longer be according to the new rules. Therefore, there will be two blockchains now. One, both are same until the point of changing of the software, and after that they will differ. So this is called a hard forking of the blockchain. So now there will be two versions of Bitcoin. One will be called Bitcoin old, and other will be called Bitcoin new, right? So that's what is called a hard fork. Now for certain changes, I don't have a picture for soft fork, but soft fork happen when you actually restrict the old rules. So the things that were valid in the old rules will not all be valid anymore. So in the hard fork, what is happening is you are not restricting the old rules, but rather you are creating new rules. Here, if you don't create any new rules, but only create rules that are restriction on the older, then even the older nodes that don't change the software will also recognize the transactions, right? Because now the new transactions will be also valid in the old rule, but not all old rule transactions will be valid in the new rule. So therefore, old nodes will not reject the blocks that has this that new transactions, because these transactions were already valid in the old rule. So an example of that was introduced when there was a new type of transaction allowed in Bitcoin called pay-to-script hash. Pay-to-script hash basically allows you to, instead of saying that I'm going to give some money to a single address, I give a hash of a script, and that script will be executed to do some transaction. So when this was introduced, this led to a soft, because the old nodes, the nodes that did not change the software, will not execute this script, but they will not reject this transaction as a bad transaction. They will think that it is a It is an address. So this is how the soft forks are created. So new signature schemes, extra per block metadata, etc. are actually soft fork possibilities. So that basically gives you the idea about the consensus in Bitcoin, proof of work consensus, and then we talked about the consensus about the rules, and not every node may actually change according to the new rules, and therefore there may be forking of the Bitcoin or any blockchain as such, and then there will be soft fork versus hard fork, right? So that's something I wanted to talk about. So the last thing I want to talk about, which is not in the slides, is the proof of stake. In the proof of stake, so as I said, that the proof of work creates a huge amount of work for the computers to actually solve hash puzzle, and that requires a lot of power. In fact, the amount of power Bitcoin spends per second is as much as power as countries like Ireland spends per second, right? So it's very, very expensive. It requires a lot of fossil fuel, which is bad for your environment, etc. So then people started saying that, okay, this type of consensus, although it's actually very definitive, it's actually not going to be very sustainable. We cannot do this forever. So then people said, okay, let's do this. Let's create something called a proof by stake or proof of stake. So there, the idea is that I want to give responsibility of the consensus to some responsible nodes. So not every node will be able to be part of the consensus. Only responsible node will be consensus. Now this is possible in permission blockchain very easily, because you know who is who, and therefore you know who are the responsible people. But in case of a anonymous situation like public blockchain like Bitcoin, Ethereum, you don't know who is who. So how do you decide who is responsible? So you decide that based on how much accumulated currency they already have. The ones who have high amount of currency will be considered responsible with the concept that if you have, let's say, 1,000 of Bitcoin, that's a lot of money. So you will not sabotage the system. You will, because once you sabotage the system, you get a wrong consensus. People will start abandoning Bitcoin as the cryptocurrency blockchain, and therefore you will not be having the value. Value will fall very quickly. Therefore, they decided that I will give the responsibility of consensus to those nodes which have very high stake in the system. So that's why the proof of stake. Now, the problem with proof of stake is that it goes directly against Satoshi Nakamoto's idea. Financial crash and all that stuff. He thought that the banks are few people, banks are people who are creating inflation and bank failure and all that, and unnecessarily draining the money of common people. So that's why he created all this. Now, proof of stake will now again give the power to the consensus, which means power to control the blockchain's operations to a couple of people who have very high stake, and they have high stake because they are very rich. So that problem is still there, and our research shows that in case of Ethereum, 5% of money is in the hands of top 100 people. So only 100 people have 95% of the stake. So only those 100 people. So these are some of the issues that we are grappling with right now regarding the longevity and sustainability of blockchain and cryptocurrency. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the questions and try to answer some of them, because I have 20 minutes. Yeah, about 20 minutes. Okay, so there is a question. Uh, why banks want to ban cryptocurrency in India? So the cryptocurrency has multiple different problems, which is one of the problem is it's very speculative, right? So Bitcoin went to almost $65,000 few days ago, about a month ago. Now it is in high 40s. So if poor people they with small hard-earned money spend money in cryptocurrency, they might be losing a big time. As I said that if there is a 51% attack on the Bitcoin, then Bitcoin will crash. So if you have put your pension money into cryptocurrency, you might be a big loser. But bigger issue is that other than the fact that poor people have to be protected from bad investment instruments, there is also the issue that cryptocurrency is not controlled by the government. See, currently, the Reserve Bank of India or any country's central bank this does something called the monetary policy, right? The monetary policy is basically the idea that I create more notes in circulation to create liquidity in the market so that people can get loans, they can create business, all that stuff. Now that leads to inflation. That leads to oversupply of money in the market, and therefore it leads to devaluation of money. So people who have money saved, their money gets devaluated, and we have inflation problem, which we are facing right now in India. At that point, what the bank does is that it starts, reducing the money supply in the banks by banks to have more reserve currency and various other policies. And thereby, the Reserve Bank of India or any central bank keeps the balance of monetary stability in a country. If inflation keeps increasing unboundedly, then the country's economy will completely crash. Similarly, if deflation happens, then the country will have no business and unemployment will become very, very high. So banks have this power. Now, if people start putting their money in cryptocurrency, then the banks will have very little control on the amount of money in circulation, and it might lead to huge amount of deflation. And similarly, if people start encashing all their cryptocurrency at the same time, there will be huge inflation, and banks will have no control. By banks, I mean central bank, the Reserve Bank in India or central bank in US, etc. That's why the banks are very, very concerned that the economic stability of a country and the sustainability of the economy or the ability to control the unemployment and inflation and deflation and all these things will become totally in the hands of cryptocurrency people. And our research shows that the Bitcoin, Ethereum, they are owned by 50, 100, 200 people, most of it. They will have the most say. So would you like our country's economy to be controlled by some people sitting in various other countries, so who have no reason to be concerned about the welfare of our citizens? So that's why banks are very concerned, rightly so. I support that. And I think that there has to be either ban or regulations, very strong regulation to make sure that the financial stability and ability to have monetary policy control over economy is retained. Now, how many blocks can be created in Bitcoin? There is no limit on the number of blocks that can be created, because even after the mining is over, that is after 21 million Bitcoins are mined, either the rules will change. If the rule changes, says that okay, now we'll increase that limit to 30 million or whatever, then also obviously mining will continue. But bigger issue is that even if you have no more rewards, you will still have transactions. People will exchange money from one hand to the other, and those transactions have to be made into blocks. So there is no limit to the blocks. So how the computational power for mining Bitcoin went up over the years? Okay, good question. So first, when the beginning there were like maybe 100 participants, right? And they were all using laptops or desktops, whatever. So they were computing hashes in about 10 minutes. And then somebody had the idea that I will make more money if I invest in hardware and I buy bigger hardware which can compute many hashes very quickly. So as soon as one person does it, then everybody notices that that one address is always winning the hash puzzle. Then what will others do? Others will also buy hardware. So they started buying hardware. So then when a large number of them started buying very expensive hardware, then everybody is making solving hash puzzles too fast, and therefore the puzzles effectiveness in deterring any kind of bad activity, civil attack, etc., will become ineffective. So what Bitcoin has to do is that it has to increase the difficulty of the puzzle itself. So they decided to design the puzzle in a way so that every so many months the puzzle complexity becomes more becomes more, such that uh, 10 minutes, approximately 10 minutes remain the average time to solve the puzzle. So in order to do that, with more and more computation power coming in, you have to make the puzzle harder and harder. So that is what is done in this one. So why more power is used in Bitcoin? Because everybody wants to win and everybody is throwing in too much computation power. That's why there is such power consumption. If the block is formed and broadcasted, why the miners will verify the block to reach the 51% criteria? Do they get any incentive for this as well? As they are mining and every second is important, why will they spend their time verifying the blocks to make money? Well, first of all, if a block contains a transaction which is not valid, for example, I have, let's say, 1 Bitcoin, and I put in a transaction saying that I give you 2 Bitcoin. That's not a valid transaction. Now, if I don't check that I have the 2 Bitcoins to actually spend it, then if you put my fraud transaction in your block, then the block will be invalid. So if I spend so much time and energy to solve the hash puzzle to make my block, I want to make sure that my block is actually a correct block. It is not going to be rejected by others. So that's why I have to verify the block. And others have to check the block is correct, because the others need to make sure that a fraud person has not solved the hash puzzle, right? So and trying to pass a transaction which is not really possible. The role of a leader in a distributed network. So these are from the old days of distributed computing. So, for example, if you want to do a computation, complex computation that requires, let's say, all the members of the network to actually do some work. How will you divide the work and say you do this part and you do this part and you do this part? Somebody has to lead. Somebody has to say, I now divide the problem into five different pieces, and you do this, you do this, you do this. So you need a leader. Everybody will listen. So first you have to do a leader election, and that's what the leader election in distributed computing has been about. How many transactions can be stored in a block at most? So let's say one transaction is about 500 bytes. So and we're talking about 2 megabytes. So 2 times 10 to the 6 divided by 500, so 20 times 10 to the 5, 200 times 10 to the, well, 2000 times 10 to the 3 divided by 500, so that would be 4 to 4,000. So about 4,000 to 6,000 transactions can be stored in a block. Key references to my presentation to understand my presentation somehow became a more Bitcoin presentation, even though I am totally against Bitcoin. So the Arvind Narayanan's book is very good. You should look that up. There is a free version of that book on the internet, which is basically a review of that book when you taught the course in Princeton. So you can get that. That's probably the best book to learn Bitcoin. Now, if you want to learn about blockchain in general, then that's not the right book. But I believe that without understanding Bitcoin well, you cannot understand blockchain. So you might want to read that first. What is consensus? Please explain once more. So consensus, if you have multiple, okay, so let's say you are in a class and your teacher says that you want tomorrow holiday. So everybody in this class, let's say 40 students, they all have to say yes or no, right? So if some of them say yes and some of them are no, that is not consensus. That's a confusion. So consensus can be reached if everybody agrees to the same value, yes or no, right? Now, in this case, there has to be a protocol by which all of them has to either convert to yes or all of them has to convert to no. So that's the consensus process. What if I transfer a Bitcoin and its block is not added in the chain? What does that mean then? It means that your transfer did not go through, and you have to either it may not be added to a block for multiple reasons. One is that you don't have the Bitcoin and you are trying to transfer it, then it will never be made into a block. Now, if you have the Bitcoin and it did not make it yet, hopefully it will make it in a next block or some other future block. Now, if you haven't given any fees, then it will take a long time before somebody picks it up. And the current algorithm for picking up a transaction to be put in the block has some part of it has to do with the fees and some part of it has to do with how long the transaction has been waiting. So hopefully your wait time, when it is enough, then you will actually be able to do this. 51% the criteria basically says that majority of the nodes are not malicious. They are not trying to confuse the consensus or not trying to pass a transaction which is invalid. If that is the case, or now if somebody has 51% power, computational power, they can do whatever they want in Bitcoin, including erasing the entire Bitcoin.
आ रहे हैं
The mining reward of all transactions in a block goes to only 1% or distributed between miners. Good question. So nowadays there is something called mining pool. So in a mining pool, multiple miners decide to work together. And in that case, the reward has to be distributed across the mining pools. But if it is a single miner, then the entire money goes to miners. Now, Ethereum has a different story. Ethereum's consensus also gives some reward to what they call uncle blocks and stuff like that. It's a little more complex. But in Bitcoin, it is only single mine. Is there any limit on giving transaction fee as it is like driving the mine? I don't think there is a limit, but it is assumed that if your transaction is one Bitcoin, you will not give more than one Bitcoin to the miner. But there is no and the bribing happens. What if one node picks up a transaction fees, but later it gets invalidated due to 6-block validation? Therefore, when you try to spend that money, remember in Bitcoin, every money is marked by the transaction in which that money was obtained. So when you try to spend that money, and people know that after 6-block validation you did not make it, then they will consider that as an invalid transaction and it will not make it. So that therefore you cannot spend that money. How nodes will come to know about hard fork? No, so they will know because some nodes, if everybody changes to the new software, then there will be no hard fork. So nodes that decide that I will not update to the new software must have decided knowingly that they don't want this new rule. So they want to play according to the old rule. So if you go to the Bitcoin, there is Bitcoin Classic and there is Bitcoin. Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. So Ethereum has now already forked like that. So people who have Ethereum Classic, they have a particular market value of Ethereum Classic. The Ethereum main will have a different market value. Ethereum main has a better market value. So if the nodes that did not become Ethereum, did not accept the Ethereum new, probably did a mistake. So that they might later on come around and decide to join the new fork. Fork is when the record. You can think of the record being record is Bitcoin is blockchain is basically a record, right? It's a ledger. It's ledger of transactions. So any of transaction, what is valid transaction will only be in the ledger. So at some point, some transactions will be considered valid by some and invalid by others. So those transactions will be recorded in a different chain, and some other transactions which are valid by another set of people, they will be in a different chain. So you'll have a fork of the blockchain. All Bitcoins are mined and nodes will charge the transaction fee. How different it will be existing structure like banks? It will still be different from banks because banks are controlled by a single entity. If Ethereum, if blockchain Bitcoin is not going the way it is going, like as I said that only about 100 nodes own most of the Bitcoins. If that does not happen, Bitcoin gets really distributed, then it will not be like banks. But if it gets concentrated in the hands of a couple of people, then it will be like banks. How to use cryptocurrency in India? You cannot use cryptocurrency in India as of now. You have to. There is no merchant that accepts cryptocurrency. You can buy or sell them in crypto exchanges, but I don't know how long that will be legal also. Example of a puzzle will be basically I give you a string and I say that guess another 8 characters in this string such that the hash of this entire string is smaller than a given value. So that will be a puzzle. Can there be a permissionless blockchain application to keep record of transactions of real money for some service or product? And yes, that's what is used by many people, insurance companies and others. But there is no reward for validation in that. Different crypto coin are layered over existing coin or are they separate underlying software? But it depends. Most of the crypto coins are different software, different blockchain. There are tokens, crypto tokens that are actually layered over existing coins, cryptocurrency. Yeah, so blockchain puzzle task is basically computing hash which has the value less than some given value. Yeah, so Bitcoin has a 10-minute average time for puzzle solving. Ethereum has 15 seconds. Uh, that's a decision that is made by the rule makers. Uh, the, uh, the question is, if you make the puzzle too easy, then there is a chance of a lot of conflicts and a lot of uh, the consensus becomes harder. Uh, the how long it takes for puzzle to become harder, that is actually already programmed into the blockchain Bitcoin software. So they are done after a certain period of time. Puzzles are automatic. How does public and private works in block? So public key is used as the addresses of Bitcoin nodes. Private key is used to sign the transactions. There is a question: is blockchain important? Well, I think it is important. That's why I spend so much time on it. But it's not necessarily important for everybody. Why is it important? It is a technology. It's like asking why is web important? Why is www important? The protocols, HTTP protocol important, and why is SQL important? These are technologies that can be used for solving various problems. So that's why they are important. Yeah, for mining, there are many other methods, including proof of stake, proof of authority, various other ways to do this. The miner gets to know not 72 hours. It takes about 6 new blocks to be built on top of it. So it's about an hour in case of Bitcoin. Miners get reward for invalid transactions. No. Blockchain current Bitcoin signature method is not quantum proof because of the public key system that is used. But there will be quantum methods that quantum public key system that are developed, and it will come again. I think we are already out of time, so I guess you have lunch or something right now.
Yes, Professor.
Yeah. So
in such a short span of time, you have covered vast topics, and that is, no one else could have covered in such a wonderful, lucid way. We really are thankful to you, and I'm sure that participants have got. They must be having interest, but now they have understood what exactly, why blockchains are important. So participants, you will keep getting information in layers, because some people are asking about cryptocurrency, some people are asking about consensus. More you will get when we go to next couple of lectures. And I'm sure that you are going to have a wonderful time learning blockchain technology. On behalf of all the academies, participating academies, I once again thank Professor Shukla for taking out this time. And we hope that you will continue to support us in future as well. The YouTube link and the video link we will be sharing. YouTube link I have already shared with you, all participants. And the video link of the first lecture I am going to share soon. Thank you so very much, Professor Shukla. Have a nice day.
Let's need to do self-study also, because by listening to one lecture, we may not get much.
Yeah.
So self-study is important. I'll send the slides to you and you can distribute them.
So we give them the PPTs in PDF, and also we give them the video lectures.
Okay.
And a lot of course material, useful links here are important.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
All right. Bye. Have a good 6 days.
Hello, it's 6 days, yes. The next is by Professor Amey Karkare.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So participants, participants, we are going to meet at 2. So please join before 2. And one very important announcement, you have to join the program, join the link using the registered email ID only. If you don't use the registered email ID, your attendance will not be recorded, and later that may lead to non-issuance of certificate. That has happened in the past for many participants, and therefore we request you to please do join using your registered email ID only, right? And second thing, some people are asking about quizzes, marks. I mean, as and when time comes, we will definitely announce. The third thing, हिंदी. तो मैं आप लोगों को फिर पुनः निवेदन करना चाहती हूँ, जो लोग हिंदी बेल्ट से हैं और हिंदी में ही अपना इंस्ट्रक्शन लेते हैं, पढ़ते हैं, उनको मैं बताना चाहती हूँ कि ये जो कार्यक्रम है वो हमारे भारत के उत्तरी इलाके से दक्षिणी इलाके तक सभी उसमें पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं. इसी तरह से हमारे पूर्व से पश्चिम तक सब हैं. तो इसलिए और साथ साथ में कुछ पार्टिसिपेंट हर प्रोग्राम में हमारे देश के बाहर से भी होते हैं. और क्योंकि अंग्रेजी सभी देशों में प्रचलित सामान्य रूप से एक्सेप्टेड लैंग्वेज है, इसलिए हम अंग्रेजी में ही ये करते हैं. बहुत सारे इंटर्नशिप प्रोग्राम्स हैं जो IIT-DM जबलपुर और बाकी एकेडमीज IIT कानपुर, रुड़की, NIT पटना, MNIT जयपुर, ये सभी करते रहते हैं. आप उन इंटर्नशिप प्रोग्राम्स में अपना एडमिशन करा करके आप व्यक्तिगत रूप से लोगों से मिल सकते हैं, जहां पे हिंदी में वो आपको साथ साथ में हो सकता है समझा पाए. धन्यवाद. जितने पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं वो उन सभी को रिकॉर्डेड वीडियोस मिलेंगे. Any registered participant will be getting recorded video. So we will be meeting soon in the next at 2 p.m. and please join before the class begins. Thank you so very much.